First of all, welcome everyone to the 2017 Promanas Investor Summit. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Brad McFarland. I'm the Vice President here at Promanas. I look out in the crowd, I see a lot of familiar faces, which is fantastic. But I also see a lot of faces that I'm not as familiar with. Certainly encourage any of you to come and introduce yourself, not just to me, but any of our Promanas team at some point in the evening. We'd love a chance to get to know you a little bit better, answer any questions you might have. So yeah, again, please feel free to introduce yourself at any point in time. Before I introduce John, I just want to tell one quick John Bogdasarian story for those of you that don't know him as well as I know him. So I have known John about 13 or 14 years at this point. I was fortunate enough to be on the ground floor back in 2009 when we started Promanas and purchased our first property under the Promanas name. So I've gotten to know him very well over the years, both professionally and personally. And I would bet a lot of money that in the time I've known John, there are probably only a handful of nights that he has not woken up in the middle of the night thinking about a way to improve our company. He's literally obsessive about this stuff, whether it's trying to protect investors' equity better in PF4, or grow global cash flow in PF3, or maybe it's a tenant issue we're having and he thought of a solution for that. He literally obsesses about this stuff. He breathes it, he eats it, he lives it. And there's probably no one better in this room to vouch for this story or the accuracy of the story that I just told you other than Lindsay Bagdasarian, John's wife, who's sitting right here. So are you going to back me on this? Is that pretty much spot on? Okay, so she's nodding. Yes, I'm absolutely accurate. The reason I share this story with you is because I think it's very relevant. If I'm sitting in your seat, John is exactly the type of person that I want investing and managing my hard-earned dollars. He's extremely intelligent, extremely caring, extremely hardworking, and extremely talented individual. And I think everyone in this room, including me and the rest of the Promanas team, are very fortunate to have him at the helm. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the president of Promanas, John Bogdasarian.
Before I get started with PF3, we're going to talk a little bit about PF3, then the real estate cycle in general, and then I want to talk about PF4. But it's really important to me that you guys came here, and I really appreciate it. And I can't tell you how much it means to me that you actually take time out of your schedule to come here, because I'm not sure I would ever do that. I mean, I'm more inclined to just sort of say, oh, put my money in this or that, and then not even really, think about it. But there are a ton of unintended benefits personal benefits that I've had from this process, from this company. The first one is who I've become as a person. A lot of you didn't know me in my childhood. My parents are here; they can tell you. I probably wasn't the most pleasant child to be around. Not certainly very well behaved, and had problems with just kind of like right and wrong, maybe, things like that occasionally. If you did a background check, some of those things might show up. But this process of trying to, achieve something, it changes who you are, and it's really been beneficial to me. The other thing that I didn't realize would happen out of this is I got to choose not only who I work for, which is you, which is great. I get to work with higher net worth individuals that are smart, that have all these crazy experiences that I hear about. And I know a lot of you don't know each other in this room, but we're starting to put some systems in place where we can help kind of connect you with one another, because there are so many different opportunities that I see in this room alone, to connect this guy with that guy because he's building this, and that's what this guy does over here, which just happened in the back of the room, as a matter of fact. And but who I get to work with, that's one that when you think about it, we spend more time oftentimes with the people we work with than our families at home. And not in my case. I take a lot of vacation time. If you know me, I'm gone a lot with my family, but I do spend probably about the same amount of time with the people that I work with, and literally they're my best friends, and they're the people that I look to for virtually everything. So this group here, the people I work with, and personal growth have been these unintended benefits for myself, so I really appreciate it. I'm going to try not to digress more than that on this, and I'm going to try and stick to my notes here because we have a lot to get through, and we're going to leave plenty of time at the end for question and answer. So, and I'll even let you get up and drink more if you want during that. I'll probably start having a little cocktail with you or something. So stay after. There'll be more food coming out, heavier food. Stay for a drink or 10. That's fine. So why do we do this? Why do we do this stuff? There's some funny pictures here, but I thought it was kind of interesting as an infant, that I'm being dragged in a sled and I'm not helping at all and I'm not doing anything. And then, around middle school, I started paddling the boat a little bit and trying. And then, this is me wearing a cap and gown in Tucson, Arizona, around the time kids were supposed to graduate from college with my parents. And I'm probably happiest here because I'm done with college. I'm pretty sure I graduated, but I haven't been able to find the piece of paper, and there was some question there, but I know I was done. So part of this process, originally when I got done with college, I was literally not trained for anything. What I had to do was come up with a way to create more value for people than it cost them to have me involved in the situation, or in whatever service or whatever it was I was providing. So that was kind of a first step. And then came this topic of, man, I really hate doing this. I was a real estate agent. It was a residential real estate agent. It wasn't terribly fun. It was a means to an end. I figured out this way to create this value. So then I started focusing on generating passive income. I started buying single-family homes, and that's when the light bulb went on. Like, man, if I could just get enough passive income, then I won't have to work anymore at all. And then, of course, we all become trapped, and it doesn't really work out. You get all these investors that become your friends and your family and everything else, and now you start seeking new levels. So the main rules that we follow, I spent a lot of time as I was trying to figure out this money thing, reading the shareholder letters of Warren Buffett, reading books about Warren Buffett, and a common theme with him was to say, rule number one is don't lose money. I'm not saying I'm the Warren Buffett of real estate. I mean, that's not for me to say. That's for you guys to say. And if you want to say that, that's okay. And and rule number two is follow rule number one. So we really try and live by that philosophy, and that's where this whole fund structure comes up with, and that's where when we look at deals, we're really trying to avoid loss. And yes, we want upside, and yes, we want to make a return on our money, but we want something that provides benefit in many ways, and we certainly want to make sure we're not going to lose money. And the truth of the matter is, it does say ego up there. I had a chip on my shoulder for a number of years. I was rejected by almost the entire Big Ten when applying to colleges. I say almost the Big Ten because there were a few I didn't even apply to. Otherwise, I would have been rejected by the entire Big Ten. But so there was this idea of having to prove something, or show that what was written on those report cards. It really didn't start going bad until like third grade. I was an angel in like kindergarten, first and second. It looked really good, and then somewhere around third grade, everything kind of, they made you sit down too long. I'll probably have you stand up every once in a while here because I can't do it, but. Anyway, these are the main reasons why I do it. And the reason I share them with you is because I get this question a lot from investors. Why are you doing this? Why are you passionate about this? What is this? Why is this important to you? And I ask the same question of other people when I'm going to invest in something they're doing, or when I'm thinking of bringing them on board with our company. Why would you do this? Why is this important to you? Because if you really know why you're going to do something, if you're really truly passionate about doing something, the how kind of takes care of itself. You'll figure it out. If you start with how, then you've got a problem because your brain will get involved and it'll screw it all up. Anyway, so on to PF3. PF3, how many people here are actually invested in PF3? Is it, Okay, so here's the problem. If you're invested in PF3, you know mostly what it's about by this point, so I'll go through this pretty quickly. If you're not invested in PF3, you may want to learn about it, but there really aren't any more opportunities for you to invest in it anyway. But it is our track record, so pay attention because PF4 kind of follows PF3. PF3 started with these one-off deals. The market was, I guess, collapsed, you could say, in 2008. It was pretty bad. We started with these one-off deals. That merged into this fund structure because, again, at 3 o'clock in the morning, as Brad mentioned, I woke up one night after having a conversation with my Aunt Barb, who happens to be here tonight. Stand up, Aunt Barb. A round of applause for Aunt Barb. Because Aunt Barb was the catalyst for the fund structure. I kid you not. We did deal 1. There were 11 investors in deal 1. We did deal 2. There were 14 investors in deal 2. The same 11. And then 3 unique new investors, Greg Anderson, who's here, and Monica, his wife. And then we got to deal 3. And there were a couple people that weren't coming into deal 3, but they were in deal 1 and 2. One of them was Aunt Barb. So I called her and I was like, Aunt Barb, you got to get in deal 3. I think this is the best one I've done so far. And she said, well, you have all my money. And I was like, what? And she said, give me all the money you want to put in real estate? No, you have all my money. And I was like, was panicking. I was like, hey, just back spasming, where's my Klonopin? And I actually didn't know what Klonopin was back then. But had I known what it was, I would have been popping it. Anyway, that's where this fund structure came about. And the fund structure really does a beautiful thing. It shrinks the risk profile. We have deals in PF3 that we would have lost for sure had they not been in PF3. If they were by themselves, we would have lost them because we had a problem that came up. We had some challenge that came up, and unless I called all the people in that specific deal and said, we need more money, and to be honest with you, that's a tough call because sometimes it looks like it's good money going after bad money, and that's not really the case. What I like to say is that I believe real estate experiences temporary setbacks. Now, a temporary setback might last 5 years, but it's still a temporary setback. And if you can carry that through, then your money comes back to you again, as long as you can offset the carry. So like, in other words, if I park $1 million in a deal, and now that deal doesn't cash flow anymore, and the bank's nervous, and the bank wants to be paid down by 500 grand, and I don't have the 500 grand, the bank has the right to come in and take that deal away from me, right? But if I can keep it rented out at that break even, and I pay that 5 grand into it to pay the bank down and make them happy and make them comfortable, then what happens is that 500 grand actually has a return. So that's where we created sometimes these short-term loan opportunities that some of you saw in the beginning, where you would loan us the money at, say, a 6 or 8% interest. We could pay that interest off a deal, then we could pay you back, and then those deals come back, and PF3 overall is way too strong for any 5 deals in it to crater it. I mean, it's not even a close call. So the other kind of philosophies behind it is to get rich slowly. What I mean by that is, it's kind of funny because I look back and I'm like, wow, this is really happening a lot faster than I would have thought when you look at like 8 years. But everybody overestimates what's going to happen in a year, what they're going to get on something in a year. I want to double my money in a year or whatever it may be. But when you look at a decade of 15% rate of return, it starts to snowball pretty good. And it looks pretty good to me. And I'd prefer the nice, safe, slow, consistent thing that we have there. There's good principal pay down, good cash distributions, and obviously we've had some appreciation on our properties, which you haven't realized yet because we don't tend to sell things. PF3, because of the fund structure, I'd say in general, we've never had a capital call, we've never missed a distribution, and here's how the distributions have gone. Over the years, we've distributed, this is annual money that we've distributed from PF3 over the past 8 years. Had you told me 8 years ago that PF3 would distribute close to $6 million in 2016, I probably wouldn't have believed you. But maybe I would have. I don't know. I was kind of cocky back then. But anyway, in addition to this cash that's coming out, which you can use for something, I mean, you can make your jet ski payment with it, or you can reinvest it in something else if you don't need it. Whatever it is you're using the cash for, you get that. But there's also this buildup going on underneath, which you'll see more in the run rate spreadsheet. Our debts are constantly going down, and our tenant quality is constantly going up. Our lease rates are going up, slowly. Again, it's a slow process. An original 50K share in PF3 is now 60 grand. So the easy math on that is instead of 7.5%, you're now getting 9. So you've had a 20% increase, not just in your share value, but in the distribution you're getting. And when you start compounding that stuff, it's pretty powerful. Now, the only thing I will say that is a little hard to explain is if it was in a corporation and we were keeping all this money and not paying it out, it could snowball faster, and then you could have a share price. And that's how companies work. This is totally different than that. This is designed to pay you forever. I mean, you should live off of the monthly checks. I spend mine. I mean, they literally, well, I don't, but Lindsay does. Sorry, I forgot you were here. No. Anyway, 2016 results for PF3. Obviously our operating income went up, our expenses went, everything went up because we added more properties. Not only that, but the properties we added in 2015, we didn't see a full year of those until 2016. So the numbers in 2017 should be even higher than 2016, just even if we don't add anything. But the only one at the bottom that isn't readily explainable is this gain on sale. Well, where does that come from? Occasionally we sell properties, and we've never had a loss on sale over the course of a year. We've always had a gain. But in 2015, we sold some properties that just, even though we thought their outlook wasn't very good or whatever, we weren't going to do as well by holding them. We sold those properties, reinvested that cash in other stuff. You PF3 members all voted on that if you took the time to vote. And we're aware of each one of those transactions individually. In 2016, we sold a few things that some may have even had a loss on paper, some had a gain, and they kind of even themselves out. This is what I call, taking care of your garden. You gotta weed it. So we're picking out the stuff that we don't like the outlook of. We don't like the long-term viability of it. What we call like our cornfield properties, the mistakes that we made, frankly speaking. And we're trying to clean those out slowly and continue to improve the overall health of the portfolio. So one of my favorite slides, and this is what I look at, and Eric has to put together for me every 5 minutes because I badger him about it. But this is our run rate overview. So this is a snapshot in time of what PF3 is doing, okay? So today, I'm going to fill these in quickly and not spend too much time on them, but today we have this first number, net operating income of roughly $13.5 million. That is basically exactly how much money the portfolio will make over the course of the next year with no changes to anything. Now, it will likely be higher than that, and that's after all expenses, okay, except for the mortgage payments. So that's like management fees and taxes, insurance, anything we have to pay. That will be a higher number than that. We know it's going up because we have increases in our rental rates, and our debts are relatively fixed, and our expenses are really relatively fixed as well. There can be some slight increases, but a lot of those are passed through to the tenants. Our annual debt service, principal and interest payment, like if you're making mortgage payments on your house, the total amount you'd pay in a year, or we'd pay in a year across all our properties, is this $6.4 million number. That leaves us with cash flow of approximately $7 million. Okay, you notice we don't pay it all out. We only paid out 5.6. The principal paydown component, that's the portion of those loan payments that we're making that is actually reducing the debt balance. So that's, again, if our properties just maintain their value, that $2.6 million is returned to us at some point in time when we sell. Everybody nod and say, I get that. It's like I'm paying my mortgage down, and when I sell my house, there's more equity. Right, okay. The principal balance, we carry around $76 million in debt. That's a boatload of debt if you ask me. But don't panic, because you didn't sign guarantees on that debt. I did, sorry honey. And And so you guys are fairly well protected against that debt. None of these numbers, by the way, include Park Place 5, which is the office building we're building on Oak Valley right now. We didn't put it in because it's not really there yet. We're just moving dirt. As a matter of fact, if you want to come out at 3 o'clock tomorrow, I'm going to be driving around one of those massive diggers. You know, like I got the kids coming out. I'm super excited. Like, this is why I started the whole company in the first place, so I could play with construction equipment. Anyway, down below, you know, you guys have probably seen this before in the packet a lot, but what I'd really like to point out certain ratios. Actually, the net operating to debt service is a really important ratio. Banks call that a debt coverage ratio. Our global debt coverage ratio is better than 2.0, meaning we could literally lose half of our operating income and we could still carry our entire portfolio and make the mortgage payments. So that's an extremely powerful position. I would say that equates to about 50% leverage, basically, on the portfolio. Even though when we buy things, we often go 65 or 70%, because we bought opportunistically and because we've fixed interest rates for a long time and we've had rental increases, the ratio in the portfolio stays very strong. The other ratio we like to look at is how much of our cash flow are we actually distributing in order to maintain that 7.5% level we want to be at. And that's what has always kind of backed into the share price. We believe it's ultra safe to be distributing somewhere between 65 and 70% of our free cash flow. If we get up to 75, 80%, that's probably okay for a while if it's a temporary blip. But the reality is, I don't like going backwards. Like I said, I live on those checks, I count on those checks, I rely on those checks. So, you know, we're a little more conservative than maybe we should be, and that will likely change over the next year or so as we roll up PF1 or PF3, I'm sorry, and close it. And I'll talk about that in a minute. That number, by the way, is about 68%. So we're distributing about 68% of our free cash flow right now. Future of PF3. What is the future of PF3? Well, we're going to continue to manage the portfolio with tight controls. That's important to us, obviously. The whole idea of doing the work once and getting paid forever is very, very important to me, and I hope it is to you. So the idea is to just keep it going and just keep making strategic improvements to it. And then there is an issue of liquidity, though, because we kind of always talk about this liquidity. Well, how do I get out? You know, and I can answer that more thoroughly in the question and answer segment, if you like. But one thing we could do is we could sell everything and liquidate the portfolio. The only problem with that is then we've like killed the golden goose, or the goose that lays the golden eggs, or whatever that story is. I wasn't really paying attention. See, I should have been paying attention. I don't want to do that. Nobody on the team wants to do that. Not many of our investors want to do that. At least none of them have said they want to do that. And so we're coming up with a share transfer facilitation program, which we just found out this week is legal, and we can do it. So if somebody wanted to sell a share, they could, and they'd call us, and we would help facilitate that share sale to somebody else who wants to potentially buy or add more. And there's going to be some valuation questions there and things like that. And again, I'll touch on that more if people have questions about it in the question and answer segment. But we will have something that comes out that addresses all those concerns. The gist of it is, if we sold the whole portfolio and we liquidated everything, and you were going to get, say, $75,000 a share, if you go to sell your individual share, it's not terribly likely that you will get that same number. You'll probably get about 95% of that number. That's my rough ballpark guess. But you can ask anything you want for your shares. We don't care. The likely, you know, if somebody wants to pay you $90,000 for that share because they're fine with a 6% yield and they know the strength of PF3, that's their prerogative. It's not like we're going to set that market. We also are going to look at potentially this buyback. We have $10 million. I guess that's the last slide. We currently have a cash balance in our reserves of about $10 million down here on the bottom left, and we're adding to it by about $2.2 million annually. So we have the ability to buy shares back from people, which would be a really fair scenario for those that want to leave, because that way we could even pay them 100% of the value of what we think they would get from the sale of the whole portfolio, because we're using the company to buy those back, and everyone that's staying in the company is getting their pro rata share of that share that we buy back. I hope that made sense. So one of the things I mentioned about this and why PF3 is so important as well is how it's allowed us to build this team of people. And I just wanted to take a quick minute here at the end of sort of the PF3 portion of this. And again, I know I went through it quickly, but I believe we have some packets that people can take with them with more detail in them. And I just want to introduce the team of people that we now have. It used to be Brad and Rachel and myself, and Cheryl worked for somebody else. And now there's Eric, who a lot of you know, and Anthony Toth, who played baseball here at Michigan, and Dennis Merrick, who handles all the residential sales for our investors that want somebody to help them with buying or selling real estate in Michigan. We don't really have a residential department. We have Dennis, and he handles it. And he doesn't do it for anybody but basically friends and family and our investors. And it saves them thousands and thousands of dollars because we don't use it as a profit center, so we don't need a fee off of it from the broker standpoint. And so that's just a service we provide. And Todd's newer. We just hired Todd recently. Todd had those familiar 5 letters at the end of his name, so I thought, well, he's got to be great. And so we brought him on. He graduated with a degree in accounting as well, similar to Eric. He has 2 years in public accounting. He's going to pass his CPA in like 3 weeks. No pressure, Todd. Where are you? There you are. And Cheryl's obviously come on board full time. Drew Pearson, he's wearing a heinous tie tonight that says LSU all over it. But he's helping me with acquisitions and dispositions, working with brokers. It's gotten more complicated. A lot of you now know Christina because she's handling a lot of the investor relations. Carla Ayers, who's a director of property management, runs Centrum, oversees a couple other buildings that we have, Rockstar, and of course you all know Rachel, I think, because if you've ever been in the office, Rachel's right there and she takes care of pretty much everything. So, without getting into too much detail, I would like these people to stand up so you can see who they are. If they're in the room, are they all here? Todd, there, Christina, round of applause for these guys, yeah? You boys up here, you can stand up, it's okay, come on. Yeah, hug it out. Oh, no, you're right. So, that's your PF3 team. And this next slide segues us. I just want to talk briefly about the real estate cycle very quickly. This is how I see it. I don't know, Eric made this chart. We kind of worked on it together. I'm sure other people have their idea of how the real estate cycle works, and maybe they're right and I'm wrong, I don't know, but I think I'm right. I say it's kind of like a sine wave or a cosine wave, but again, I wasn't paying attention in math, and this doesn't look exactly like the same ratio as my calculus classes, but like a scrunched one or something. So here we are going through time, and PF3 is down here in the lower corner, and really this line could come up here, because we really started buying in PF3 up around the dashed line. The market was still on its way down. It's just opportunities existed that we could take advantage of on the downside. That's when you want to be buying. Maybe not right at the top of the downside, because you kind of want to wait and see how bad is this thing going to get. But after a while, it gets, when people were telling me, what are you doing buying real estate in Michigan? Turn off the lights when everybody else is gone, or when when you leave. And so that's when we started buying in PF3. And we kept buying in PF3 all the way up to about where the arrow points, maybe a little bit past it. We have one asset under contract. We've written on another one. And so we may be able to sneak a couple more in, but we're not going to deviate from our parameters and what we think are the right prices to pay for said assets. What's happening now is people are paying way more for the same income stream than we're willing to pay. And so they are purely relying on the upside in the market, which is fine because there's going to be upside in the market. We're at the beginning of the upside in the market. But I just don't want to buy it. There's too many things that can change with what are called cap rates. If I buy at a 6 cap rate, even if the market goes up tremendously, it doesn't mean that I can sell at a 6 cap rate, because cap rates are also dependent on interest rates and other factors. So even if the market goes up, if cap rates go up as well, I still can't sell the property for what I paid for it, and I'm locked in it. But if I've been buying at higher cap rates, meaning lower prices for the same income, which is what we've been doing, cap rates can go up and I can still sell my property and do just fine. I won't make as much as if I sold it at a 6 cap, but I can still get out because I bought it at an 11. So it's okay to be buying stuff right now. I don't want anybody to think that people shouldn't be out there buying stuff. I just don't think it's the right time for me to be buying stuff based on what I think is going to happen with cap rates ultimately. I think the right thing to do in this part of the cycle is actually to start building stuff, which is why we've created PF4, because now we can build properties that pencil out to these higher cap rates, and then we can sell them to the market at those lower cap rates. Okay, so like if we can build something to say a 10 cap rate, and then we can sell it at a 6 cap rate, we make a massive amount of money because people are in the market paying those exorbitant prices. Now, what if people aren't in the market paying those exorbitant prices and cap rates are 9 or 10 or even 11? We're still fine. We're not going to lose our ass. We're not going to lose our money because the reality is we're getting in at a 10 cap, not a 6. Buying at like a 5 cap or a 6 cap is like, in my world, that's like suicide. Unless you see something in there like, okay, this guy's rents are 50% under market, so I can pay them based on their numbers a 6 cap, but once I raise the rents, it meets my parameters and my criteria. As we have this explosion in new construction, which you're just beginning to see, unless you go to Denver, it's all over the place. There's cranes everywhere. And in a lot of markets, it's like that. But in Ann Arbor, it's just starting. There was a project just approved downtown you may have read about. It's massive. It's a massive project in scale. And 3 years ago, I would have said they were insane. And today I'm thinking that project will probably work out okay. Not for me, but that's fine. And so as we're building in there, you got to think about what this does. Like every time a new project goes up, there's new, that's title company business, that's contractor business, that's broker business, that's business for everybody. It's insane how many more jobs that stuff creates, so it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now the construction company's got to hire 10 more people. They need bigger office space. They got to lease more office space. We got to build another office building. It just perpetuates on itself until you get right up near the top when you start realizing that, that cycle is all that's left feeding it anymore. And it's not really a real base group of, supply and demand fundamentals or whatever you want to call it. There aren't net population gains supporting the number of units coming on the market. And at that point, which is like where we were in 2006, you could start seeing that happen. I had friends putting deposits down on 6 condominiums at one time in Florida so that they could flip out of them. Tim, who I'm talking about. They, not Tim, but so they could flip out of them before they were completed. When you're in your Uber, I was going to say taxi, but those don't really exist much anymore. When you're in your Uber and your Uber driver's telling you, oh yeah, he's just driving cars for fun. He's making all this money, putting deposits down on these projects. That's the time you kind of, you back off. You get out of the projects you're in, you wait, and as the cycle goes down, on to PF4 now that you're all perked up because I put that mental state in your head. I see some of you popping up there. It's all right. So we designed this PF4 similar to PF3, a few nuances to it. And what we do is we vet hundreds of potential projects. We partner with experienced developers. We put up 100% of the capital and we retain 100% control of the deal. These are all so far ground up development deals. Maybe we'll get into some repositioning deals. Anything where we think we can get into this project, out of this project, meeting at least about a 15% return to our investors. We actually target higher, closer to 18% on kind of what we consider the downside. But this is what we do, and what we're doing is we're creating this amazing amount of value for not only our investors, you and me, because I'll have a lot of my own money in this in addition to what we get for doing it. We will buy large chunks of this with our capital. As a matter of fact, I just sold an apartment building that I had, all my single family homes, and we're working on an office building that we've got. We're trying to get rid of all of our remnants so we can just plow money into this and use this as our next vehicle. This creates value for the developers that we're working with as well, because what's happened is we're getting inundated. I was on this podcast recently. Some of you may have heard it. We sent out a link to it. It was called the Real Estate Guys Radio Show, but it was really, we found out after I flew down there to do the podcast, or maybe on my way down, Eric texted me or something and said, by the way, they have this Bay Area radio show. And I was thinking, man, if I get on this radio show in San Francisco, wow, this will be fantastic. And so Eric texts me on the way down and says, by the way, the show airs at 2 o'clock on Sundays. And I was thinking, who's listening to the radio at 2 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon? And the next text is AM. And I was like, all right, well, nobody's listening to the radio show on the way, but it'll be good practice. I'll go down there, I'll do this radio show. Well, it's also a podcast, right? And I didn't really know much about podcasts at the time. I knew what they were. There's an app on my phone, but I wasn't really into podcasts. So this Real Estate Guys radio show goes out on this podcast thing, and had 88,000 downloads, some crazy number of downloads, and all these people inundating our office, can I get more information? And frankly, I was like, half of me was like, oh God, I can never do that again. That's just a complete, I can't even answer the emails in my inbox, and this is all a waste of time, and how are we going to do this? And anyway, so it's brought about this whole new facet to our business, which is kind of being on podcasts, and part of being here tonight was getting used to being in front of a crowd. The hardest people to speak to are the ones I think. And so, but it's exciting, and at least half the inquiries that mean anything to us are young, up-and-coming, wannabe deal guys. Guys like I was 20 years ago, where they're like, I don't have any money. Dad, can you co-sign on this loan? Which you never should have done, by the way, but you did. I always tell people, don't invest in your kids' garbage and co-sign on loans for them. I'm like, that's the worst thing you could possibly do. And that was actually, my dad kind of got me my start because he co-signed on a loan. It was a small loan, $800,000. It worked out all right, though. It made money. But anyway, so these developers, I had 3 conversations with 3 different guys today. Smart guys, good projects, know what they're doing, construction experience maybe. They bring something to the table, but they don't have the money to do it, and they don't have the ability they don't have a track record. So what we do is we go in and we re-vet their project entirely. We look at it a whole new way because we've been there and we've done it, and we maybe tighten it up and make it look a little worse than it potentially could come out. And then we write them a proposal, and we say, hey, we'll do everything. We'll do all the debt. We'll do all the equity. You get a good fee for doing the deal. And once we make a good return to PF4, then you get to share in upside above and beyond that, which is very good money for them. And so they get to learn the whole process. And the whole time I tell them, while you're doing this, you can do one of 2 things. You can build an investor list for yourself and represent this deal as your own, and we're fine with that. Or you can send investors to us and say, if you want to be involved in my projects, go through these guys, and we're happy to coordinate all of that. And the latter is what they've been doing, which I never would have done. I would have said, no, I don't want to give these guys the ability to make these returns. But we've created a system where it's far more valuable for these developers to simply say, I don't want to worry about the money. I can go a lot faster. I can do more projects. I can spend more time doing what I'm good at if I just let these guys worry about the money. And for us, it's a little easier to come in and see a project clearly because we've looked at hundreds of them, so we can kind of cherry pick the ones that have the best deal sponsor, or boots on the ground we call them, the guys that we really get a good feeling for, that didn't have a petty theft from Target show up on their background check. Perhaps that's a joke for the bankers in the room that have actually pulled my background check. And obviously it helps the community. So I'm digressing a little too much, but essentially this value equation keeps holding true. It's just holding true in new ways, and it's really exciting. It's a lot of fun. So this is what the PF4 Fund Details are. We just started it basically. It's targeted to do around 100 to 150 million in total projects. We've got a target investor capital of $30 to $50 million. I think we have somewhere between 20 and 25 million on the commitment or reservation sheet or whatever you want to call it right now. I'm going to use an example when I explain how this works of 40 million. I'm going to use an example of if we end up with $40 million of investor capital, that'd be the money I actually write a check for and put into this deal myself, plus all of you and anyone else who chooses to participate in it. Let's say that total number is 40 million. We have a share price of $100,000. It says minimum. I have cut that in half for some people that are like, hey, I haven't invested with you guys before, or I'm in PF3 and I want to be in PF4, but I've only got, 50 grand now, maybe I can have more. That's fine, whatever. We don't want to get into quarter shares and goofy numbers, but a half share is okay. And it's set up with a preferred return of 7%. We get a lot of questions about that. A preferred return means, let's say, for instance, it's 40 million that we end up with. First of all the money has to be returned to the investors. The entire 40 million comes back. Then the investors get a 7% return on that 40 million, which is accrued. We're not paying it out monthly like PF3. It's just accruing for your benefit. Once the projects pay that back, then my company gets an equity piece. And then once we're caught up on our equity piece, which is 10% against the equity, so the next $4 million of profits to come out of the deal, after return of the 40 plus the 7%, 10% of 40 million is 4 million. So our equity would come out at that point, and then there would be a split of excess profits that would be 90% to the investors, 10% to my company, our group, essentially. There is an annual management fee of 1.2%, which is calculated on the total capital that we have in the fund. And so that's for things like flying to Duluth, Minnesota, and Denver, and we don't bill anything to this entity. So just like PF3, we have a management fee on all the assets, and that kind of offsets our office overhead. And actually last year was the first year, I think it was last year was the first year that the management fees finally offset office overhead, and which was really nice, and changed my whole way of thinking, as a matter of fact. And so there's a fee that offsets office overhead, but the bulk of our compensation is this 10% written in. Now, if you've looked at deals like this before, this pref structure, if you've looked at many of these at all, you will, and I explain this to you because I always tell everybody, if you get deals pitched to you, your higher net worth individuals, please feel free to send them to me. I will look through them. It will take me 3 minutes to tell you what questions I would ask of the people and why I think the structure makes sense or doesn't make sense. At least the equity charge of 10% that we have and the profit sharing of 10% after a preferred return is about half to maybe 40% of what you will typically see in a deal. You will typically see that be 20 to 25%, all the way up to 50%, where you say, hey, investor, you get your 7% pref, but after that, we're going to split everything 50-50. And there are many reasons why we're not doing that. One, because we're putting our own money in here too, and it's fine to get good treatment on our money. Two, because virtually every friend and relative I have is invested in these deals, and the ones that aren't my friends or relatives probably will be soon, But it's also a good way to shrink the risk parameters. So the worst case scenario for me on any potential deal is I make a bunch of money and my investors do not, because that would cause all kinds of problems. I'm flying around on my private jet. Everybody else is like figuring out how to try and make back the 300 grand they lost with me. That would be like, if you consider the story and my ego and everything else, that would be horrendous. We're saying this is about a 5-year deal. I think it'll happen faster than that. The projects that we're doing, the Denver University project called Observatory Flats that we just approved to add into the deal, that's really a 2-year time frame on that. So as that deal starts liquidating, you'll start getting pro rata chunks of your money back, probably inside of, I would say, 2 years from the end of this year. And this fund closes no later than June 30th, although if we hit 50 million, it's done. there's not much we can do. I have some very substantial commitments from higher net worth individuals, and I'm trying to phase them into the process as opposed to saying, okay, yeah, you can have 5 million or 10 million in one chunk, so that I can kind of accommodate a lot of people. And that's important to me as well, because this, if you have, and that's selfish, if I have all the money I'm working with is with 1 or 2 or 3 people, and one of those people says, yeah, I've had enough of you, John, I'm ready to go do something else, or I'm getting a divorce and I don't have half my money anymore, or whatever may happen, it's not as strong, it's not as powerful as having 1,000 investors, let's say. And there's other benefits. Many of our investors find deals for us as well, and that translates to things also. Rich Hanna, where are you, Richie? Rich is back here. Oh, back row kid, huh? Okay. Yeah. Rich Hanna, I've probably told many of you the story of Rich. Rich lives in Denver. Rich is one of the reasons why we're doing a lot of deals in Denver. Rich is what I'd call a deal junkie. He looks at hundreds of deals on his own, and he only sends me things that he's already pre-vetted. I mean, literally, probably sends me 3 deals out of every 100 he looks at. And so it saves me a ton of time, and it's kind of funny how we got involved. Maybe I'll tell that in the question and answer segment, because everybody's probably jonesing for their next beverage. And so we're targeting a 15% annual rate of return. Like I said, each individual deal that we're doing is showing more like 18 to 20%, but we don't, think that all of them necessarily are going to work out. I mean, they could. I expect they will, but you never know. So I want to just do a quick, this is an allocation of proceeds. We did this last year with PF3. Investors buy shares in PF4. PF4 puts that money into individual development deals, which each have their own bank loan attached to them. I guarantee those loans, which is why if anybody says, you're making too much money, I'm like, hey, come on in anytime and sign on a $35 million construction loan for a hotel in Denver, and I'm happy to give you some of my equity. That's, no problem. And that usually, changes the conversation quite a bit. But so we invest in these things. We'll add more as we go along and as the members vote to add those subsequent deals. And then what happens is as these deals liquidate and we pay off the bank loans and the obligations of those companies, we then pass all that cash back up to PF4. There are, on occasion, most occasions, there will be developer fees in these sub-entities. And these developer fees get paid to the guys that brought us the deal for running the deal while they're running it. And then we share in the developer fees as well, but they don't go to my company. They go back into PF4, because if you remember, PF4 is paying us a management fee to run the whole portfolio. So there's no developer management fee or compensation down below at the entity level that comes to us. It goes right back into PF4 with all the profits. Now, as those start happening, we first return the capital to the investors. We then return their preferred return. So until you get your capital back, let's say in 2 years we pay you back half your capital. You put in 100 grand. In 2 years you got 50 grand back. We owe you 14,000 for the 100 grand we've had for 2 years. That's your preferred return. It's just a simple interest calculation. We're not compounding it. It's too complicated and it's too short of a window. So instead of making it like 6% compounded, we just said 7% straight line, easier to keep track of. But we still have 50 grand of your money. So we still calculating your preferred return on that remaining 50 grand that we haven't paid back to you yet. So you keep getting that, because ideally once we give you your 50 grand back, you'll come into the next thing we're doing and you'll start getting a return on that as well. Then we have the excess split where we carry and share and whatever, and I'd stop there and ask questions, but I think I can back up to any of this in the question and answer segment. So if you have any questions, I can always jump back. So again, just because it's newer, we get proceeds from the sale of our assets. We pay off any debts and company obligations at the individual LLC level. We get that money up to PF4. We return 100% of the investor capital. We pay the preferred return out on the investor capital. Then the Promanas equity kicks in and we get compensated and our equity accounts caught up. And then there's a split of the remaining profits, 90% to investors, 10% to Promanas. So that's basically the structure of PF4. What's in it right now? We have the Element Hotel, which is by Weston. It's on Allocation Street in what's called the Golden Triangle District of Denver. We're another massive project of retail with, I think it's 16 stories of residential above it. Was just approved, maybe a block away from us. There's another huge condo project going on there, and I believe an apartment complex going up as well. This Golden Triangle area, if you don't know Denver, sits right off of downtown. I mean, it's right there. It's basically downtown, the convention center, then the Golden Triangle. The US Mint is right there. There's a big art museum right there. It's a great location that's been neglected for years, and the land values are astronomical. The same size parcel that we bought for the hotel, the guys that just got their project approved paid over $12 million for the same size project, and we paid $3.6 million for our land. And now they could go higher and get more density, so it's not really an apples to apples, but based on the analysis I did quick and dirty, it'd make our land worth realistically $6 million. And basically we started this project about 18 months ago. We started working on this project and had the land under contract at the 3.6 number. It's got a 3 to 5 year time frame. That window got shrunken quite a bit when Marriott and Starwood merged. We anticipate that getting to market occupancy in a hotel under the Marriott booking system will happen much faster than we were projecting. We were projecting a 3 to 5 year ramp up, even we were looking at like a 7 year time frame. And now that seems to be compressing in newer hotels that are coming online. We're seeing that they hit market occupancy a lot faster than they otherwise would have with access to that system. And this pencils out at about a 20% annual rate of return on the money if it hits our numbers, which show, our numbers, by the way, on this are using a 7.5 cap sale. It's using a 7.5 cap rate sale. If it was built today and we could click our fingers and sell it today, it would get at least a 6 cap, maybe all the way down to a 5 cap, which would translate to like a 26% or 28% annual rate of return. I mean, it gets kind of stupid, but again, we're not going to rely on that. So we also have, these are the nearby projects I mentioned. I got ahead of myself. 16-story, 302-unit apartment development is the one on the right. There's a 22-unit condo development. And this condo development is more kind of what the neighborhood's going for. They're going for more of a retail-y, mixed use, walkability. This runs right along a river that runs through the middle of Denver with these biking paths. You can literally bike right downtown from here. It's really quite a nice area. 300 days of sunshine. Don't move though. I mean, we can't let Ann Arbor go, completely vacant. The other one that we've gotten here, Observatory Flats. That's our 52-unit project it's right across the street from Denver University, which is very underserved. There's about we say 18 to 24 month time frame. That's from when we put a shovel in the ground, which will probably be 6 months from now. And again, that one's showing about a 20% rate of return. That project, by the way, illustrates one of my previous points. Dublin Development is doing this project. Dublin Development did the first project we did in Denver called Elliott Hill. It wasn't out for wide public consumption because we had to make a decision on it we were standing in our office at 4:45 on like a Thursday trying to decide if we wanted to do this deal or not. And we're all like Rochambeau, we like these guys, it's out of our market. Do we want to go to Denver? Well, we got to test it, we believed in the deal, but it was just like, okay, whatever. And took $2 million of equity. It was relatively small, so just a handful of people funded that Elliott Hill one. And but once we saw that and we saw that go, that actually is finalizing right now. It'll be probably completely done and fully liquidated in June. So total start to finish on that project from the time we put a shovel in the ground was 18 months. 18 units. I think we have 13 sold. and you can't even really see a unit yet, which is amazing to me. I mean, people have bought this in the middle of a construction mess. They're just buying these things. Sale prices are higher than we projected. Construction costs are right on line. We were projecting a 27% rate of return to the investors on this in an 18-month period of time. It's now showing about a 31% rate of return in that time. So when we kind of got our, and we did the same thing in Ann Arbor. We tested the market in Ann Arbor. There's a condo project there that we can highlight and talk about a little bit as well, called Kingsley Condominiums, if you're not familiar with it. So we kind of tested this stuff and we came back. These are the same guys. This is Dublin Development. And these were the guys, this was when I was shocked. I was like, all you guys got to do is talk to like 3 rich people in Denver and you'll have all your projects funded. And they're like, we don't want to do it. We don't want anything to do with it. You guys are great. You take care of everything. We don't pay bills. We don't do anything. We just run around. They have 4 more projects after this coming down the pipeline. And some of them are borderline ridiculous. I mean, the returns are like, you're just looking at it going, how can this possibly be possible? Now, you got to get through all this stuff and figure it out. And we got to make their numbers look worse so we can carve a better deal for ourselves. They should be here because they'd appreciate that joke. Great guys. And so, you know, we want to go back to people that are proven and trusted and that we've done well with before. And that's what this one is. And that's likely what the next one will be, which will be a similar condo development in an area called Jefferson Park, which talks, that's our deal pipeline is, man, there's so many opportunities to choose from. I could tell you it's a fun and it's a frustrating part of the job that we do because it's hard to say no to some of these things. But you got to say no to 9 out of 10. You got to say no to 95 out of 100 because if you're not, you're not getting a good deal. It's like you don't know. If you just look at 3 things and you do them all, how do you really know? So part of our process and the learning experience. I mean, I've been doing this for the last 2 years, looking at development deals, hundreds and hundreds of them, and haven't done. I guess we've got 6 going now or something, and the thing is, we can only go as fast as we have the team for and as we have capital for. So I don't want to get ahead of myself. Like if we have 20 to 25 million on the list of people wanting to invest in PF4, then I'm not going to send out $50 million worth of deals because then that's going to make me have to call you all and bother you and hassle you to put more money in. And that's just not, I don't want to convince people of anything. I want to present something and say, hey, if you're interested, great. If it's not right for you or doesn't work for you, no problem. Who do you know that it might work for? You've all heard me say this stuff. As a matter of fact, it's kind of funny. I was talking to Christina on the way here. I'm like, print out a list of all the people that are invested in PF3. I bet there's a lot of people between like A and H. Because I used to go down the list and I used to call everybody. And I'd call them all like, hey, did you see the deal package? Did you do whatever? By the time I got to like H or whatever comes after H, it was like I was full, and so I stopped calling people. And then every once in a while I'd start at Z and go upwards from Z. And so I think the middle of the alphabet's kind of gotten, saved or screwed. I'm not sure which. We won't know for a while. But anyway, so we're reviewing these projects daily. That's our we have many more in the pipeline, but I just don't like to throw them out and start talking about deals till there's so many we get involved in and take a look at, and then we kick them to the curb, and it's not really worthwhile to send them to you until we're sure. And so, thank you. Thank you for coming. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so I had one question at the break, which I thought was a good question. How do you think interest rates are going to affect what you're doing? And how do you think interest rates will affect my REIT shares that I'm holding? And I can speak to the part about how I think interest rates will affect what we're doing. I don't think they'll have much of an effect on it at all. Because we're working in a very short window, short time frames. So if they move, will that affect things a little bit? Could it potentially slow the sales market? Yes, but it doesn't really affect our financing. And really, we're going into markets that have a supply and demand problem. There's more demand than there is supply. So that's not going to deter somebody if their mortgage rate is 4.5 versus 4.25 or 4 3/4. Now you got to keep an eye on it because if it's 8 Well, now that makes a difference. But where we are in our space, we're just looking at supply and demand, and we're in short-term spaces, so realistically it shouldn't have much of an effect. On the REIT structure issue and how REITs worked, it's a little more complicated, and I try not to be a fortune teller on these things because I really have no idea what interest rates are going to do. But the reality is if interest rates go up and you can get a higher yield from your savings account than you can from a REIT, chances are your REIT yield is going to have to go up, which is going to bring your share price down. And that ratio is so extreme that you can be right owning a REIT type vehicle for a long, long time. And when you're wrong, it can move the share price down so fast that it wipes out all of your gains that you had along the way or your cash flow you got along the way. And theoretically, that would happen in PF3. However, you also have the ability to raise the rent on your tenants because higher interest rates typically mean inflation, and you can raise your rents over time. So like an apartment REIT, I wouldn't be as worried about because those rents can be ratcheted up faster. And REITs tend to have their interest rates locked in for a long time anyway, but I'm by no means an expert on REITs. I hope someday maybe we have one. I mean, we could make one now out of PF3 if we wanted, but actually I'm not even sure. I hope we have one. Scott, you had a question?
Yeah, the valuation problem. Now, I actually went back and looked at the original documents, and it had PF3 as a time frame of about 10 years, which, obviously there's a liquidation event in 10 years. Best liquidation event in the world, most accurate liquidation event in the world is to sell, right? How are you going to come about determining a fair value in quasi-liquidating event?
Yeah, so if you didn't hear that, the question is how are we going to come up with a fair valuation for what a share is worth in order to try and facilitate a share exchange, because nobody really knows what we would get if we actually sold the property. I mean, the purest way to achieve it is to just sell everything. Then we know exactly what it's worth. So that's a tough question to ask because Scott's a freaking CFO of a company and whatever, it's all analytical. But it's like this. It's actually really easy. That's how we're going to figure it out right there. No, I'm just kidding. So what we would do is we would take our net operating income and we would look at that because that's a fair bare metric, and we would put a value on that based on like sort of a blanket cap rate that we would think we would achieve across all the assets. Then we would deduct a cost of sale of say 5% or 6%, what you're paying, transfer tax, broker fees, and we would come up with a value. So if we think we can sell at an 8 cap, we would divide blend it across stuff. Maybe we have some stuff that's lower, some stuff's higher. We would come up with this formula and we'd say, hey, here's the formula we came up with. Here's why we came up with it. It means nothing to how much you want to ask for your share necessarily, but when you break it down and you do the division, based on this formula, a share is say $80,000 or whatever it may be. And so if somebody asks me for that guidance, that's the guidance I would give and that's how I would kind of value it. But again, I'm not setting the market. So if they say, well, I want $85,000 for my share, will you send it out to everybody and see if they'll pay that? Sure, we'll send it out and see if anybody will pay $85,000 for a share. And so essentially, while we're not creating a market, there will be essentially a mini market that is created, if that makes any sense. Oh, right.
No, the other thing I wondered about, and maybe you addressed this and I missed it, was if PF3 keeps going on for a few years, what about increasing value with periodic refinance of properties? If there are interest rate changes or you build up a lot of equity that's just sitting there, when does refinancing debt come in? And
yeah, that's another good question. So never. I mean, we will refinance properties because the loans will come due, but we will keep the same amortization schedule and just refix the interest rate for a period of time, and we won't ever borrow money out of properties. Never. We just won't do it. I'm vehemently opposed to it. I want them all paid off, and then your distributions will double. You know, that's if you look at, we're paying 6.3 million in debt service. Once our debts are gone, about 6.3 million more we can distribute. And that's, that could be stupid, that could be ultra conservative, that could be ridiculous, but you know, every time you refinance your mortgage and put it on another 30-year term, all you're doing is paying more interest. And it just, you know, it's kind of counterintuitive to do what we do and get things paid off, but at the same time, it's like, what that's going to do is it's going to create this premium that people are going to have to pay for someone's shares. They're not only going to have to buy the cash flow, they're going to have to buy the equity in there as well that is like hidden. And so back to Scott's question, that's going to create a more complex formula where it's going to be like, hey, I know I can buy a share and I can get, you know, this much cash flow per month, but also the book value of the share is 30,000 more, you know, and it's growing fast because principal paydown is happening quicker in the end of the amortization schedule than it is at the beginning. So you're going to have to pay that guy more to get that value. Now, if you want to unlock that value for yourself, but not sell your shares, so you could get that value by selling your shares to somebody else. And somebody else, that's easy to explain. Hey, you're buying this share, and it's worth $80,000 based on its cash flow, but there's another $30,000 in book value. So you got to buy the share at 110 if you want it, and it's worth it. That's what it's worth. We can calculate that. So that's one way to get out. And I'm not saying, this, by the way, this is a plan. You know, I mean, this could last 2 years, and I could be like, holy cow, you know, we have a $4 billion development company now. Who cares about PF3? Everybody will be happy if we sell everything and give them a whole pile of money, which is what we just did with a bunch of other stuff. And so, you know, this could change. But for right now, this is the plan. And the plan is designed to suit me and suit you at the same time. So if I always defer to investors, like if our investors are saying, man, I just want you to sell everything and I want you to get out of this deal, I want to take my money and go off into the sunset, that's a vote. That's a vote thing. That's a 50-50 vote. I'll take myself out of the equation and do what everybody else wants to do every time. I'm fine with that because I can go do something else. That's not a problem. But to speak to your question, unlocking that money, you know, I just don't see. We have contemplated taking all the debts of PF3 when we get to a certain point and saying, let's go to a large lender, let's take all the debts in PF3 and let's put them all on an interest-only loan, no principal paydown, fixed interest for 10 years, interest only, and then we can distribute 15-16% annually. And so that's a possible option too. We might do that. And then that, you know, your yield's just way higher. And I don't know, you know, it depends on whether that loan requires a personal guarantee or not, whether or not I would, you know, distribute out all that cash. Because again, there's nothing back in these personal guarantees that I'm signing except PF3. And so, you know, that's a problem. It's not necessarily a conflict. It's a good thing because I'm not going to bring you a deal that I'm not willing to sign a guarantee on in PF3 or PF4, but it's also a problem because I got to backfill a reserve account to back these personal guarantees or problems in case we run up to, I mean, some of the roofs we have, like I kid you not, to replace a roof on one of these industrial buildings is like $1 million. And if we ran this thing thin and we had to come up with a check for $1 million to replace a roof that we're responsible for, which is fine, I mean, that's just part of the thing. But if I have to call everybody and say, hey, I've been sending you all this money all these years, do you mind sending a little back so we can, you know, replace this roof or do this build out for this tenant, which is going to increase our cash flow? I'm sure you guys would all come up for it. I have no problem with that, but I don't want to ask you for it. I never want to be in that position. So I'm answering the question in a lot of different ways, but I think ultra conservative is to, you know, get that, have a bit of that delayed gratification thing, you know, where, and it just makes you feel good. You know, I sleep well at night. I don't have a problem, you know, with anything.
Can you speak a little bit about tax obligation versus the distribution? Mm-hmm. Because this year there seems to be quite a big gap between the actual distribution and the tax obligation in the K1. And then in PF3, is that going to, is the gap going to get wider? Because now you are going to have a lot of equity now being.
Yeah, good question. So there's a couple things that happen. So there's a few things we have not been able to do in the past while PF3 is growing. And that's one thing is called cost segregation. So when you buy a building, a commercial building, you're allowed to depreciate that asset over a period of 39 years. Okay, that's a long time. And so, but there's another law that says you can take that building, you can break it apart into its components, and you can depreciate different components of that building in much shorter times. Like a roof, you might be able to depreciate over 15 years, or a parking lot over 7. I don't know the exact rules, but it allows you to take way more depreciation, which would shelter your cash flow. We have not been able to do that in the past because we have people buying in and buying new shares, and that means they're buying into something where like depreciation has already been taken, and it just creates a mathematical nightmare. Once we close the fund, we can use cost segregation to shelter more of our return so that you won't have this tax problem where I'm paying taxes on more money than I actually saw. Our formula has always been to try and bring the cash distributions up to a certain percentage of the actual tax liability that's all distributed to us. The good news is that PF3 is essentially done, so none of this really matters much anymore because we're not admitting new people, there's no dilution. It's just a matter of figuring out this year and saying, how do we best take advantage of it? Now, to answer your other question, will it widen or will it narrow? It will narrow. It should actually go to the point where, I don't know, the only way we would get it to the point where we were able to distribute more money than we were actually being taxed on is if we switched all of our loans to interest-only loans. Because that principal paydown component, that extra $2.5, $3 million that we're paying down debt by, that's money that we really have to pay, and that's called profit, but it doesn't really go to us, and we're having to send it to the bank. Those bankers are freaking relentless, There's a few of them here, I think. Anyway, I invited the bankers too, so I could I try not to talk bad about people unless they're in the room. So I try and invite everybody because I just, does that answer your question? Yeah, okay.
John, PF3 is obviously, we buy, hold the assets, or only sell them when you need to. But PF4 feels more like you're trying to get out of them very quickly. And my question is, what happens if you can't get out of that particular asset very quickly? Is it set up to hold it or do something with it, or have you thought about that?
Yeah, good question. So in the development cycle, my preference is, if I could build and hold, I probably would. But the only thing you can really build and hold right now are apartments. And this gets a little confusing because the way the cycle works, it actually goes by, inside of that loop-de-loo I showed you, there are asset classes that it goes by. Like the first thing to recover is always residential. That's first because, that's I don't know, it just always comes first. It's like, it's logical. I mean, people have to live somewhere. So they got to, residential has to recover. So apartment complexes, well, there were a few we could have possibly bought in 2008 or 2009. It was like, they're gone. I mean, you just couldn't buy them, which is, then it goes to single tenant deals, which is why we bought like Grand Valley Health Plan, the Breton Road deal with Metro Hospital. They were all single, the Fox Brothers deal, they were all like single tenant deals. Then those were all gone. Then it was industrial. It always goes to industrial next because now the economy is starting to recover and it's like, like I said, I don't know how to get my head out into my mouth sometimes, but essentially with there's jobs, right? And now the industrial companies are recovering before anybody else even sees it. Like, I mean, I went out when we bought Quality Metalcraft, I go out there and they're like, I mean, it's amazing what you glean from that. I mean, they went through a period where, they had a third of the workforce. Now they're like, everybody's back there and we need more space. And it's like, but nobody knows, nobody knew when we were buying it. Like nobody knew the economy was recovering. I did because I was in all these industrial buildings, seeing them hiring everybody to get their hands on and buying new machinery and equipment tools, which creates more jobs for that and whatever they do. And, so as this cycle goes through, it creates this, it creates a situation where you have to jump from asset class to asset class. The last one is basically, multi-tenant office, which is, what we put into the portfolio of PF3 near the end. It was like these multi-tenant office deals because now you need offices. Everybody needs office space to do all this other stuff. It's kind of the last one. So when you go into the development cycle, Same thing, residential is first. You can build apartments right now, you can make money building apartments right now, but it's also the first thing people leave. They jump to single family homes, right? Because now all of a sudden I got a good job, I got the money, I don't want to rent forever, I want to buy a condo or I want to buy a house. So in the development cycle, to jump asset classes, you have to, and get in and out of deals, you have to move more quickly. Now, if you get stuck, which is what your real question is, if we get stuck in a condo deal, what do? Well, we rent it out. I mean, you know, that's the ultimate safe haven. We say, hey, you know what, everybody, we put $5 million into Observatory Flats, we got it built, we've sold, you know, 30 of the 50 units, the market's kind of tanking. On the 30 we sold, we were able to pay down the bank by enough so that we can convert the rest of the loan into this, you know, long-term, term it out, fixed loan, and our $5 million is stuck in these last 20 units. And that's not a terrible thing, because then theoretically when we sell those 20 units someday to somebody, we can take a cap gain as opposed to like ordinary income. So, you know, it's not all bad, but it is bad. You know, we don't want to get stuck. But I'm always looking at the exits. You know, I'm over here for a reason. There's no door over here. Nobody, well, there is one, I guess, but only Harbaugh can come through that door, and he's got no interest in killing me. No, so there is a, you know, we're looking at the downside, and so there are, you know, that's kind of, like I said, the risk of real estate. You could get stuck in something, you rent it out, you get the income you can from it, you don't give it back to the bank ever, and then, you know, you go on and live to fight another day.
Yeah, I noticed PF4 is heavily Denver. Are you worried about being over-concentrated in Denver?
Yes.
Will you do deals outside of Denver, I'm assuming?
Yes.
Any particular place?
So the first question, I tell people that, especially brokers when we're working with them, we are not geographically driven. We are not asset driven. We will do any type of deal. We are situationally driven. So what I mean by that is we look for a situation that exists where we can create value, we can make a good return, and we can either get in and out of it relatively quickly or hold it forever or whatever the case may be. But it's a deal we know we want to do for its intended consequences. So I'm not overly worried about being concentrated in Denver, but I am worried about being concentrated in Denver because that market is going to shift. It is going to start getting overbuilt, and we want to make sure that we are topping off the tank, getting out of stuff at that point, and going to the next place that makes sense, which are mostly urban infill areas right now. So we're looking at Kansas City. We have some projects that have been pitched to us there. Our Dublin guys in Denver are good enough that we will literally probably bring them on board to fly around and oversee projects in other markets that they can get to quickly around Denver. Portland, Seattle. I looked at a project that was, I mean, the returns would have been, you know, it was double your money, probably 2.5 times your money in 3 years for a condo project attached to a Ritz-Carlton, but it was in a ski town in Tahoe, and when we looked at it, it was like, all right, we're going to build 50 condos, and while the numbers all look really good, only like 4 condos in that whole market sold last year. So how long is it going to take us to get out of 50? And what happens if they have a bad year of snow next year? You know, and it was like, doesn't make any sense. Like, so situationally, that doesn't work for me. I'm like, you know, if I don't have a market like Denver, build 157 hotel rooms, I mean, that's like nothing, you know, into that market. That's not even, I mean, there's 157 rooms that probably went offline yesterday because they are refurbishing them or something, you know, or 15,000, I don't know. I mean, it's a big market. So, you know, there are certain deal parameters that we want to stick to and know. So I do think it's time to get back into some of the southern states, Arizona, some of the, I hate to say this, I hate to say it because I've seen like 3 of them. And you know, for me, I always thought like, man, why would anybody ever do that? Who on earth would ever be old enough to live in a 55 and older community? And I'm like, man, that's like right around the corner, you know? So I go, now I don't like doing those deals just because I don't like thinking about the fact that I'm going to be 55 soon. I mean, 9 years, but still, it's like right around the corner. So yes, I'm worried about Denver, but that's kind of how we keep a very close eye on it. Supply, demand, number of permits being built, net population gain every year, what that population gain is for, what jobs are being created. Denver One's just recently become basically a tier 1 city. So now all of a sudden, you're a big company, a worldwide company, you kind of have to have a location in Denver. I mean, that's what we're seeing. Heinz just built a massive office building downtown, just spec'd it right out of the ground. I mean, it is huge. And so you're talking about, all the companies that have to locate there and then bring in all these people, they need places to live. We keep a close eye on that. So then you asked what other markets I'd look at. I kind of covered that. I do think it'll be time to go south. That was a good question I had at the break was, what happens with my PF4 money? I get this, do I get the money out? Do I not? Do I automatically roll into the next one? That's kind of what I like about PF4. It's a different vehicle. We'll get into all these deals. We'll do all these deals. As they come to fruition, you'll get all your money back. You can go take that and live in a beach community, or ideally, if we did a good job, you'll want to get into PF5 or PF6 or whatever we call it at that point in time. It may not be identical, but it just sort of depends on what the market bears at that time. My guess is it'll be very, very similar, just maybe larger on PF6. Although, if the opportunity presents itself, we've had some recent situations that have come up where as companies need to expand their locations and they need build-to-suit facilities, if we can get a long lease, we would build it, develop it, put the money in, own it forever, and it'd kind of be like a PF3, but it'd be really insulated because we've got like a 15-year lease on it. You may know some of these companies, but they're maybe even some of our current tenants. You never know. Good question.
Anybody else have a question?
Awesome. Well, thank you again. I appreciate it. Thank you.